Welcome to Hacking Postgres, a podcast about extensions, extension creators, and other interesting, innovative things in the world of Postgres. I'm Rye Walker, founder of Tembo, a managed Postgres company, and today I'm here with Melanie. Melanie, tell me how you say your last name.
Plageman.
Plageman. I was going to say Plageman. I knew that was wrong.
Yeah, it's pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Yeah. Maybe could you start with maybe a quick background? I'd love to know a little bit more about where you grew up, what you were doing before Postgres.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up. Well, I was born in California, but I grew up partially in Ohio, partially in Connecticut, and I actually in college did not study computer science. I wanted to. I took some classes, but it was pretty. I think it was hard. Like I had trouble sort of making progress, and I thought, I don't know if I can do this. So after school, I did a startup with some friends, and I thought I was going to actually go into filmmaking because that was what I focused a lot on in school. But we started a equity-based crowdfunding platform, and I was just really interested in the technology part and wanted to, help actually make the product. So that was when I started learning to code. And after that startup failed basically after we stopped doing it, then I went and did another one in Nairobi for a couple years. Wow. And then after that, I was like, okay, I have to get a real job. And so I still at that point, wasn't ready to get a full-time software engineering job. So I went into basically IT consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And that was really cool because I got to see sort of the technology needs of normal sort of non-tech companies, right? I did a lot of data quality kind of things, which I'm sure a lot of Postgres users are familiar with. Yep. Having customer data with 5 people with the same name, different email addresses, things like that. And, a lot of the technology needs of regular companies are not AI and big data. They're, basic stuff. And so I think that was kind of eye-opening for me. But I really wanted to focus on actually writing code and have that be the way that my career could move forward. So I quit my job and developed my first Postgres extension. And I basically I'd used Postgres a little during my job and had wanted to do something that I couldn't do in core. So I developed an extension, and I loved hacking on Postgres so much that I decided that's what I wanted to do for my job. Yeah. And I applied mostly to places that were doing something with Postgres and ended up getting hired at Pivotal. At the time, Pivotal was eventually became VMware, which is now Broadcom. But and working on Greenplum, which is a distributed fork of Postgres. And that was my first full-time software engineering job. And it was quite a lot. I was being introduced to all these new concepts, and Pivotal at the time did a lot of pair programming. So that was a really awesome way to get involved in the space. And I'll leave it at that because I think there's a lot there. But basically, I ended up getting involved in open source Postgres and eventually doing that full time.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I worked with some people who worked at Greenplum and Pivotal and all that. So I'm sure sure we know a lot of people in common.
Great people.
We'll leave that conversation off the podcast. Yeah. That's cool. Maybe tell me a little bit about the extension you started. The problem you were trying to solve, I guess, maybe first.
It was so long ago. Okay. Yeah. So basically it was, I wanted to be able to, so there's the format function in Postgres, but I wanted to be able to actually sort of template out and generate SQL queries and interpolate H stores and rows, I think, and that kind of thing into format. And so that was what the extension did. And I needed it to be a C language extension to be able to do that. Because we were doing a lot of sort of repetitive SQL queries with, just change this or that kind of attribute.
And you were probably sitting there like, am I about to learn C++? Or had you already, I mean, no, most of the time, unless you're a hardcore computer scientist, you don't learn that.
No, I had not done C before. And honestly, I think a lot of people, the first programming I learned was like Python, you know, well, probably Excel macros, but then Python. And so it's like C is a lot different, but I think for me, like I wanted to understand everything all the way down the stack, and because like I was like, what is all of this, magic? I don't like it. I don't understand it. So C kind of was like a way to really understand what's happening, and I liked that.
Yeah, and I'm sure once you start looking at the Postgres code base, you realize there's just so many nooks and crannies that no one can know them all. It's just a big code base.
It's true. Years later, I can't even tell you. I don't know what percentage of the code base I've seen, but it's and understand, but it's not that much of it.
yeah, that's amazing. So have you? And then real quick, like, what are you working on today?
Sure. Yeah. So we're in the middle of the development cycle for Postgres 17, and basically this kind of happened accidentally, but I focused a lot on vacuum this time. This release, a couple different features for vacuum related to reducing the amount of wall produced by vacuum, and then also a couple people in the community are working on this new API for doing like streaming IO or vectorized IO, which is going to be like a stepping stone towards getting AIO into Postgres and eventually AIO and direct IO. So I'm working on some of the different users for that API as well.
Is that connected to the vacuuming work, or is it just two separate like areas?
It's unrelated. One of the users for the streaming read API is vacuum, but other than that, it's pretty unrelated. It's good to keep a couple of projects because you never know what's gonna actually get merged.
Yeah. So do you work full time on Postgres, or do you have other responsibilities?
Yeah. So I since I work at Microsoft now, and since I joined, like there have been times where I've been less focused on core upstream Postgres, but the last like 2 years, I would say it's pretty much exclusively that, which is awesome, and to get to focus on bigger features. It's hard to split your focus and really get things to be moved forward. So nice. Right now, yes.
Yeah. Were there other extensions? I imagine too, you probably like start extensions that you don't finish. Did that ever happen?
Well, so one of the things is like as a Postgres developer, there's a lot of developer centric extensions in contrib and that come with Postgres kind of. And so one thing that, we do is last release, I had a couple additions to one of those extensions. And that's like a really I wouldn't survive without those extensions. Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a tricky little area, right? Like those are extensions. They're good like reference extensions as well. I mean, I think it makes sense that they're in core on one hand. On the other hand, it doesn't make sense they're in core, but you probably like that they're in there because they're so I mean, again, just because it's called an extension doesn't mean it's not mission critical, right?
Right. Yeah. It makes it easier for us to maintain them and make sure they're up to date when they're in contrib. Because then if someone breaks something or does something that would break the extension, you notice. Well, not always, but usually you're more likely to notice. And I do use I'm trying to think how often I use extensions that are not in core. I mean, occasionally you write something like a tool. If you want to write a tool to do development, a lot of times an extension is the right way to do it. But I think I haven't written anything production worthy extension wise in a long time. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. What would you say like in your journey? Let's just say since the Postgres era began, like what have been the biggest challenges Was it learning C? Was it was it how you work in Postgres, which is pretty unusual, I think, compared to a lot of other open source communities? Like, what's been tough, out of curiosity?
So I think it's kind of like two main things. And one is that, because I didn't study computer science, at the beginning, especially working on a distributed fork of Postgres, there were so many concepts that I needed to learn. And so it felt like getting, I feel like there's a lot of operating system knowledge that you need to have, distributed system knowledge, things like that. And so I did when I was starting out. And I mean, I worked on the Postgres planner and on Orca, which is another query optimizer focused on analytical queries. And those, like, query optimization is its own field of study. So I spent a lot of time, outside of work, and also, I took classes and went back and learned that. And I think the first few years of development, because I wasn't working as much on upstream, the thing that was hard was sort of getting the subject matter knowledge to really be able to understand what was going on. And then as I sort of felt more comfortable with that and focused more on, how to actually get code into Postgres, I think, that it's not just like the way that we work, which I think can be very difficult and hard to get used to at first. And it's especially difficult for drive-by contributors, or I mean, like people that want to contribute something, like a user is like, I need this feature, wants to contribute it. The way we work is not really conducive to that. But I think if you do it as your job full time, you kind of get used to that. You can get used to anything, right? Yeah. But the thing that can be hard is that it's open source. So you're working with people who, there's not a product roadmap and a product manager, and this is the priority. And if you write the code, it'll go in. You have to build a base and like a interest in your features. You have to get consensus from people that have no incentive to care about it. Yeah. And it can feel like screaming into a void sometimes.
Yeah. Have you gotten to the point now where people are coming to you to help them get their thing in? Is that I imagine that's what you evolved to. First you're screaming into the void, then you're like listening to the screams into the void, right?
Yeah. I mean, since I'm not a committer, I think I've avoided some of the masses coming to me and asking me to help. But one of your responsibilities as a full-time contributor is we're maintainers, right? So definitely, like, I don't do as much review as I would like, but I every release I try to make sure that I focus on at least one project that's not my own work and isn't just the work of someone who I directly work with, like a committer or contributor, and try to help move that forward. And I think there are people in the community that and committers that are doing more of that now, because there is such a bottleneck on work that has a lot of delta between it being committable and not.
Yeah. And it's stuff that you guys must want, or else you wouldn't spend the time, right?
Right.
Yeah. Are there any big milestones, either in Postgres itself or in your own work, that you're looking forward to? Yeah, I know.
So I think you learn at some point not to get your hopes up too much about getting certain features in, and kind of like focus on the day-to-day wins. Yeah. So I would say milestone-wise, so PGConf.dev is the Postgres development conference. It's happening in May this year, and I'm volunteering on the program committee. And that's sort of a milestone that I'm excited about, because we are going to have additional sort of content around learning to contribute. And I'm excited to sort of share some of the things that I've learned and build awareness around, for the existing committers and contributors around what they can do. Because I think once you've done it for long enough, you kind of forget the pain points. Yep. And so while they're still in my mind, I want to try to do everything I can. And so that's like one milestone. And then this Commit Fest that's right now, January, is it's not the last one before the release, but there's a lot of work that I would like to see moving forward. And so that's sort of like the code freeze milestone is one that I'm dreading. I don't know, looking forward to.
Yeah. Maybe switching to more generalities. Like I'm curious, like important lessons maybe that you've learned over your career. For others that are following similar paths. Is there anything that you would say that you would tell younger you?
So I think I keep making a lot of the mistakes that I've always made, which is sort of pushing too hard and getting my heart set on something and wanting it to move forward. And I think it's not just open source. Like as a developer in general, you can really put your heart into something, probably not even just developers. You can put your heart into a project, and the reason that it doesn't succeed is not because you didn't do a good job, right? It's other priorities or whatever. And so I think I don't know what the best way of dealing with that is, because if you don't really put your heart in something, it's hard to have it succeed.
That's right.
So I think it's for me, it's having a support network of people who also have the same experiences and can say, hey, it's not you, it's the system or whatever. I think that's something that I would encourage people not. It's easy to be a solo hacker, or not easy, but it's common to be a solo hacker in Postgres. And I think a lot of people are I'm going to do the work myself. And, there's definitely a lot of sort of independent solo hacking. But I think with that, you can end up feeling the weight of your, not failures, but lack of getting things in feels like solely your fault. And that's usually not the case.
Yeah. It reminds me of I'm I love watching NBA basketball, and obviously all those players are so passionate about winning, but unfortunately every night only one team gets to win, despite that. And I think it's similar in software engineering. We don't quite think of it as like a competition. And then there's also just random rolls of the dice that happen,
Yes.
I was literally talking about Pivotal. I was chatting with someone from there yesterday, and when Kubernetes came out of nowhere. It was like an asteroid that just smashed into some of the products that Pivotal had, that they did nothing wrong. They were crushing their strategy with Bosch and all this stuff, but then bam, and that can happen as an individual developer, that the right person that you needed to approve something taking Postgres got hit by something else, at the same time, and there's only so much capability. So
right. Yeah, I think also having your career goals be around, what did I learn today?
Yeah.
What am I learning? And then defining success in terms of, some combination of that, and how have I helped my coworkers or other people in the community learn something or get satisfaction out of their work. Those are things that are more within your control and you can feel good about, even if.
Yeah, no one can stop you from learning. That's for sure. Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. So tell me, are you supporting in any way a commercial product? So are you guys kind of disconnected from the Microsoft commercial Postgres tools?
Yes. So we are our team is focused on open source contribution, but Flexible Server, which is the primary Postgres offering on Azure, is in our business group or whatever you want to call it. So we, when there are whatever the issues that customers are having using Postgres on Azure, those really set for us what our priorities are in terms of what we work on. Yep. And of course, we also hear about, advanced customer issues that sort of are especially challenging, eventually make their way to us. But I think one of the things that's great about working at a, cloud provider is that you get huge data set of customer use cases and pain points and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And even though Postgres has all these different, individuals working at different companies and competing priorities, you can still set the direction of your own work and the work of people with similar concerns based on real customer pain points.
Yeah. Are there some things coming in Postgres that you're excited? I mean, you mentioned the async stuff a little bit, but even outside of your own personal contributions, what's exciting for you? What's going to come in Postgres, this year?
Well, so I think at this point in the release cycle, I'm very biased by what I've reviewed or looked at.
Yeah, of course.
So, and things in my area, but there's work on other work related to vacuum and how basically dead item storage is done, and that will improve vacuum performance and efficiency a lot and reduce the number. Like there's a lot of performance complaints people have about vacuum that it would help alleviate. And that work has been discussed for years. And it's one of those things where when there's a really hard engineering problem, it just takes time to agree on a solution, find the cycles to work on it, and move it forward. And I really hope that that happens this release.
Yeah.
And then one of my colleagues has worked on, so last release, there was a new statistics view that went in PGStat.io, and it had IO for a lot of different types of backends and different types of IO, but it didn't have wall IO in it. And so that I think will probably go in this release, which introduces a lot of additional observability. And then incremental backup, which is Robert Haas worked on. And I think most of that is merged now. And I think that's something customers our users are going to be really excited about. Those are just some of there's
Nice.
a lot. There's so many people doing exciting work.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask real quick. We had an internal debate. We were talking about like PGPartman versus vacuum and whether vacuum can do, basically solve the same problem that PGPartman does. This was as it pertains to like message queues, where it's like very timestampy data, and I think that there's. Maybe do you feel like the stuff that's happening in vacuum can help just make it feel like it's gonna get the job done, and you don't have to come up with like novel things like PGPartman or do you view like it'll still have a place, and it's not. So I'm kind of curious to get your take on that debate.
So PGPartman is an extension for something with partition management, is that right?
Yeah. So like you can basically say like this is a partition, and you can just like drop that partition, and if it's say a daily partition, it's easy to make sure you're dropping those rows that are that information that's related to that slice of data. So it seems like a kind of a clean way to like manually keep keep it clean and not have holes, that you have to compact.
So one of the things that like we're not yet working on in this release, but I really hope that we'll do some work on next release, is around like vacuum scheduling. And there's a lot of configuration or auto vacuum scheduling, a lot of configuration parameters. And I think one of the biggest complaints that we hear from users is that, well, some of my tables are not getting vacuumed at all, and some of them are getting vacuumed way too much. And so I think there's a lot of reasons for that are complicated. But basically, I think that's something that we have possible solutions that would work. And so I think something like that, potentially, I'm not exactly sure about the PGPartman use case, but I think if you're vacuuming the right tables more often and reducing bloat, then you're probably going to avoid issues like with some parts of a table that, I don't know if that addresses exactly what you're talking about, but yeah.
I was just curious. It sounds like, I didn't know if you, knew that extension super well or not, but it sounds like not so much. That's no big deal. Well, okay, so this is a fun one. Like, if you had a magic wand, you could add any feature to Postgres, and it was just like there, and it was perfect tomorrow. Like, what would you use that wand on? Could you? No effort. Requires zero effort. You get the perfect feature added.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I think it's hard because there are things that would make my job as a developer easier. Yeah. And those are things that, as a developer on a day-to-day basis, you're like, what would reduce my pain? And I think those are probably different than the things that would excite customers the most. Yeah. But, I think that like logical replication of DDL is something that eventually will happen and that customers would really want.
Yeah.
And I think, I let's see. That's a hard one. I think I would need to think about it more to come up. There's so many things that people want, right?
Yeah, it's tricky because you're like, for me or for them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I hear you. Do you have any opinions about Postgres that like not a lot of people agree with you about? Like, do you have any controversial or it's okay if you don't, but I'm kind of curious if there's like, I'm always interested in that.
Well, I know that there's, I think from an implementation standpoint, there's a lot of people that think that Postgres should just go to all 64-bit XIDs, and I guess that's controversial on both sides. And some of my fellow hackers have explained to me some of the downsides and challenges with that, and I think my opinion has probably shifted around what the right solution is there.
Yeah.
But I'm interested what I know, like, so for example, we see obviously blog posts that are big, like the issues with vacuum, and I think there was OtterTune or something had a blog post that everyone was talking about the biggest problems with Postgres. But what are the things that you hear from like extension developers or users that are their hot takes about Postgres?
Me? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I like to just kind of talk about myself as a developer, struggling with extensions, just because like my problems aren't quite solved yet, and so for me, like I was trying to use the columnar extension, which originally came from Citus, and then like Hydra forked it and added some stuff, and then this was like a year and a half ago that I was looking at this, and I ended up not doing anything just because there was just too much choice, I guess, and not any sort of opinion on this is the best one. It was just too much work for a developer who just wanted to like grab an extension off the shelf and try out columnar on Postgres. I don't want to think so hard about which one I prefer, and so I felt like extension discovery and was. And it would have been great to know, like, well, no, like 99% of the world uses the Citus version, or 99% of the world uses the Hydra version, but that information is not available anywhere. So,
yeah, definitely like reviews too, I feel like would be useful. Kind of like if you're going to download an app and there's different options, you read the reviews and say, okay, this isn't for me, or this is, or I'll try this out. And I think that would be great to have for extensions. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all challenge with all that. It's all hackable, like a growth hackable, right? Like you can get 10 friends to say this is the best, and but even if it's not, but no, I just think like it's an area that we're focusing some energy on, just because it's again, it's just like a huge. That's why I think a lot of developers don't use many extensions. Is it maybe is a mistake, and you're like heading down a path that's going to cause you some pain down the road, and we all try to be safe to a big extent.
You think it's because of the sort of maintainability and knowing that it's going to be updated with each release, or is it like security, or?
Yeah, it could be any no one has given it a seal of the columnar extension, for example, like going back to that, even let's say the Citus version, no one has given it any sort of seal of approval that it's secure or that it's being maintained, so there's like no assurances, from anybody really, I mean, I could try to message the developer, but that's a pretty heavy lift, to I don't have a prepared checklist. So I just think like some sort of certification. I mean, in a sense, like if it's on one of the big clouds, it's semi-certified, it means that it made it through Amazon's review and Azure's review if they're like both have it. But again, like show me where that list is, where I can see a cross-reference of what extensions are available on the clouds.
Yeah, I wonder what makes big open source projects different, though, because like on some level, Postgres as an open source project, what's your guarantee that it's going to be maintained, right?
Well, we got you, Melanie. I think that like in this case, I have zero worry that the core I think that the core projects, like the structure that it has evolved into, is actually a very elegant solution. That there's this group committers, and they have like a ring of contributors around them, and it's like a much, to me, it's a higher quality, obviously potentially slower system, but it maximizes on quality to me, and I think that's the right thing to optimize for. So I'm excited for that. But like I said, the extensions core extensions follow that same system, but I'm talking more about the fringe, like that are just loose on the internet.
Yeah, I'm not. I haven't never done much or any really like front end development, but one thing I wondered is I hear that sort of the JavaScript ecosystem can be like that too. Like you're going to use a bunch of different libraries and you don't know which ones are going to be maintained or all the dependencies and all that.
Yeah.
And is that something that anybody else has solved?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say the area where I think it's semi-solved is in like Kubernetes land because of the CNCF. I don't know if you're into Kubernetes at all, but like CNCF is a foundation that has a lot of like related projects under a foundation. So I've been talking about this a lot with Same and others. Like we should build a Postgres ecosystem foundation that'll give those projects a home and governance and a team that's like just making sure that they're maintained for the future. And I mean, obviously you can, if you decide like something's going away, it goes away like officially and not just like it fades. Some of these things fade away where you look at an extension, you're like, oh, that looks cool. You go to GitHub and it hasn't been committed in 6 years, and it's like,
right.
No one shut it down. It's just, and maybe it's not even dead. Maybe the code was perfectly written, but I doubt it. Certainly.
Yeah, governance in open source is an interesting thing. Like one of the areas, Jonathan Katz wrote a blog post a week or so ago about the areas in the Postgres community that we should focus on and, going forward. And, one of them is like mentorship and one of them is governance. And, that's a complaint a lot of people have about Postgres is that there isn't enough governance or there isn't enough transparency about governance, especially for, the ecosystem part of that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's something where I don't think some people probably disagree that it would be helpful, but it's more a question of like the people that maybe could do it or would have the technical authority or whatever you want to say to do it is like they just probably want to write code and I don't know how other projects deal with that.
Well, again, I think the challenge is the respect for how deep the code base is and that like there really shouldn't be a benevolent dictator lording over all of Postgres because no one can be that knowledgeable about the whole thing. I mean, like maybe like Linux has Linus and he's he understands all of it and he's been doing it himself for 20 years and all that. But I just think like the decentralized history of Postgres development helps enforce like decentralized leadership. And like I said, I think it's great. I think it's nice that it moves slowly. It just gives me the feeling like it's always going to be solid. And we're not going to have like a 18 or whatever, let's say a 17 or 18.0 release that's so bad that you have to come out with a .1, real quick. But that happens in other open source projects where the .0 release is just not usable. You don't use it because it's not, they basically know there's bugs in there, but they're just throwing it out there so you can help them debug it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the quality for a .0 release in Postgres is, out of this world better than every other types of system.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So, well, awesome. Well, I'm curious, do you listen to podcasts very much?
So about tech?
Yeah, anything.
Oh yeah, I do. I listen to podcasts pretty frequently. All the like NPR podcasts I love, Radio Lab and all of that. And then I also usually listen to the Path to CitusCon podcast that Claire and Pino and the team over there at Microsoft do and have been a guest. And I think that's super fun. And then the Oxide Computer, oh my gosh, what's it called? I used to listen to that one. And there's an IEEE one that's good. Yeah.
Wow.
I do listen to some. I also love listening to like Andy Pavlo's, his database class. Like he has a lot of guests that come on and talk about database stuff. So,
See, I'm glad I asked that question because I did not know that he is publishing that stuff. I'm kind of new to Postgres, but I've seen him speak a couple times, and he's, it's a super smart guy. Love hearing him talk. I'd love to hear even more. So that's cool.
You should check out their YouTube channel. All of his lectures are on there. And then the interesting thing too, so I mean, sometimes if you're in database development, you're like, I don't need to hear, an intro to query optimizers again. But he always keeps everything up to date with recent, technology and goes into areas that you wouldn't expect. But then he also has guests from industry and academia come on and talk about, other databases, their architecture, like new databases. There was one really good one with DuckDB that I really liked. And so it's like, I don't know that there's a lot of other places where you hear the founders of different databases come on and talk about the technology behind it and how it works. And I like that a lot.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, appreciate, the work you've done in Postgres and your ongoing contributions. Thank you for that. Are you on Twitter? Where can people find you on? I know they can find you on the Hackers mailing list, right?
Right. Yeah. So I am on Twitter, but I prefer Mastodon these days. I have like 5 followers, I think, but I'm trying to de-emphasize Twitter, but I will respond if people, tweet at me there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thanks for joining, and good luck with your work on.
Thanks, Ray.
Going forward. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.